Welcome.
I'm hoping that all of you, this is not a first visit to the museum. Hoping that that's true.
I'm just going to have to stay near you because it's actually tuned to my microphone.
Oh, so can you hear?
Yes.
Is that good? I'm Tina Olson, I'm the director here at the museum, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you, and I'm also delighted to welcome Jonathan and Karin Fielding back to the museum. Jonathan and Karin Fielding, as they can tell you themselves, are collectors of much of the work that you'll see in these galleries, and they were kind and generous enough to loan a lot of it to us as a way for us to think about what this kind of material, early American folk art, could mean in a setting like ours, college liberal arts setting. And I think it's been a fantastic experience having the work here. But I'll let that unfold over the next hour. Is there anything else that you guys need to know about this before we get started?
Just not to touch.
Yeah, that's why we took you no food or drink. That's why we took your coffees and obviously no touching. So,
yeah, well, when they put the no food or drink, they weren't talking about M&Ms.
Oh, in that case,
that's a whole different food group. I graduated from a place that was similar to this. It was called Williams College. It was about 50 years ago. When I went into the library yesterday, I realized it was a different school. So we've been collecting art, folk art, decorative arts, paintings, furniture from about 1680 to 1850. That is not a reflection of our age. It's close. And so we've been very interested in the material culture. That's a funny kind of sounding set of words, but a thing that people used every day. Why did people who lived in this very rural area, most of our stuff is from New England, want to have fancy things, trying to make things look nice or make things artistic, or have pieces that people could look at and say, that's really you. It's a likeness. Remember, there was no photography at that point, and believe it or not, the computers were much more elementary. That was pre-Microsoft and pre-Mac and Apple. And so people had to write things down, and they have registers that you'll see here as well. But one of the things that people did was to make out of very simple objects things that were very, very practical. As you will see, with the effort to try and have a gauge that would allow people to, the scaler, as they called him or her, it was almost always him, to figure out how many log feet of board you could get, how many, that's not logarithmic, that's log feet you could get out of a particular tree. I'm trying to use those kind of materials. So there's a wide range of things here, some just to enjoy. Look at others that had practical application. For example, these chests were things that people really used to store their linens, and women particularly to store their dresses. And when you look at the death register, you find that the most valuable thing that people had in early New England wasn't necessarily their furniture, wasn't their paintings, it was the linens and the dresses that were in those, because those were the most valuable, those were the most expensive. So anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm, by the way, I'm a professor of pediatrics, public health, and preventive medicine at UCLA, and I've been there for only the last couple of centuries. And my wife does a lot. We do all this collecting together, make decisions together, go to auctions, try and have somebody look at things, because supposedly New York isn't right next door to Los Angeles, and most of the auctions occur there or in Boston, or I should say Boston. So any questions you have, happy to answer. And I think it's always great to have a professor, and most professors don't have heart, but when they have a little red, that professor has heart.
Well, the reason for the red dot is I believe in educating my children on the past. And so I haven't been going on quite as far, but this is now my third decade as an instructor. And so we've been watching The Incredible Hulk, the original series, as well as the original Battlestar Galactica. So the red dot for the Cylons and getting my kids used to classic sci-fi. Cameron did wonder if they had electricity when I was a kid. And I told him about the day when we finally got it hooked up at home. But what I thought I would do is show my three favorite pieces here and just have a little bit, general discussion. Anybody can join in. I'm not an expert on these items, not even close. But one of the things I have learned through years of doing and studying mathematics is that there are certain problems that are faced by people again and again and again. And it's what kind of solutions can you do with the available resources? And so to me, there are so many things we don't even think about anymore because it's automatic, it's second nature, it's being done for us in the background, that we no longer think about, can we do it better? When I program, for the most part, I program very crudely, on a sledgehammer approach. When I was first starting, it took 7 minutes to load Flight Simulator. And it was a stretch to call it a flight simulator because it was a bunch of circles and straight lines. We had 16 kilobytes of RAM. And so, to me, I'm always amazed whenever any of my files, for a book or a paper I'm writing, breaks, 1.4 megabytes. Because, I still remember the old floppy disks and how you store information. And so, the issues of, how you store information. There was a beautiful discussion here a few weeks ago about the nature of books in the future. And should everything be electronic? What kind of security do you have with the technology that hasn't been around, that the information will still be there and still be available? So I thought a really good first thing to look at would be one of the desks in the next room. And so why don't we just walk over to the desk? And we can get a beautiful view for those of you who's walking, but not chewing gum.
Their last name, and this is the desk of Ebenezer Devotion. It's about the turn of the century, not the 21st or 22nd century, but the 18th and 19th century, the 18th century and 17th century. This is the ball feet. It was never finished. You can see the plane marks. Now they've planed this down, and you can see the very old H hinges with hand-wrought nails to put in there. You also can see in here, if I can get it right, there. That's the inkwell to keep the ink. This was basically the filing system. All those pigeonholes there. And you can see that it was very well used. These are the original hinges. And you can see how nicely these are actually dovetailed. Excuse me. See how they put these things together. Now, they weren't mathematicians, but you have to be pretty good to get that close with those levels of tolerance. So,
you're not allowed to do this.
Right.
We own this.
First, you're ready from the personal question.
You're setting a bad example.
I've touched it once before.
John will pull it out. It was open before.
Do you want to put this out?
Yeah, sure, please. So everybody's one, that's mine.
These iPhones really
One thing is to double back a little bit. Do we have just like
all we need is
actually,
all you need is there you go. Here we go.
And this is from an iPad. The iPad does have a use. Okay. So a nice preliminary. Okay. So before I say a few words about this, what do you think the main issues were? What do you think in terms of operations research? What do you think they're trying to do efficiently? What do you think are the issues?
Well, before that, they're definitely trying to optimize space.
So one thing is the space issue. And so you want something that's compact. You want something that comes down, gives you a comfortable place to write. And is the height adjustable?
It seems designed for a set user, probably someone who I'm guessing would sit down and be a bit taller than me. So probably a man. Also, you would roll things up and put those in there, so it's not designed to be a filing cabinet as we think of it now, where you want papers to stay flat.
So, do you know if this was custom designed for a specific individual?
This was designed for Ebenezer Devotion, and we would have had a chair. That's a corner chair, so it probably would not have been that, but it would have been one of roughly the same.
I find the chair interesting in terms of, which is the corners of the chair that are actually having the bars coming up. It looks like it's at an angle coming forward, whereas normally I would have it on the sides for the arms. Just looking at the chair.
Yeah, that looks like it comes a little bit.
Well, I'm saying, if this is where your back is.
Oh yeah, no, it's remarkably comfortable. I used that chair, by the way, at my desk in our place in Maine for a number of years. Yeah.
But in terms of looking up here, what do you notice? What kind of optimization or questions do you think they would have?
It wants to make the space accessible. That's why the corners sort of cut off on the desk.
So it wants to make the space accessible. And so here, in terms of the angles you go, in terms of how far you can go, how far you can put things in. What else in terms of other issues?
Like how many storage spaces for drawers versus how many spaces
Yeah,
for...
almost anything in mathematics, you can ask how many, and then you can ask where. So, what's the range of having more drawers? You wouldn't have a need to subdivide. So to me, an interesting question is, how many subdivisions were there as a function of time, as a function of the complexity of the person's life? So, 100 years earlier, in say the 1600s, did you have desks with as many compartments?
But you didn't have slant desks, basically. The slant desks were relatively new when this was made.
Then the other thing is, every time you have a subdivision, you have extra walls. And you will lose a little bit of space every time you put in a wall. Plus, of course, then there's the issue of having things fit into the different compartments. So in terms of the optimization, remember we had the problem, you have a positive integer, you want to break it up into a sum of other positive integers to maximize the product. There's something very similar going on here in terms of how many divisions do we have, how high do we make them, how wide, how deep. All of these questions are going on. The other question I would have is, are there secret compartments? And they're stuck in your comment.
No, there are no secret compartments in this, there are some American desks that have secret compartments, but this is very, very straightforward.
You would say that. If there were.
The day after 9/11, I saw on one of the big three networks an interview by one of the networks with an airline pilot. and they asked him, do you have any secret ways of communicating with people on the ground that terrorists might not know about? The pilot very quickly said, no, of course we don't. Do you have any other questions?
Oh, I was just wondering what kind of items would be stored in the underside of the big drawers, because it looks like once the desk is pulled out, you can't really access those very well. So that'd be kind of like bureau storage or less frequently used desk items.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what would have been in there, but most things were used to store family items. So I don't know exactly where that was. There's some good pictures of those drawers, but most of them have linen. Some of them have some are used to have a Bible, but they have Bible boxes. Whether they're really used for Bibles is really a question. But mainly soft goods, mainly linens and dresses and draperies, if you had them, whatever.
And then there was a lock on the front?
There was a lock. Everything is locked up very well. And you'll always find, I'm not going to put this back, yeah, but everything you'll find is locked. Now there are desks that have something that goes down through, so when you lock the top, the rest of it is locked. This doesn't. The only one that's locked here is the top.
So who were they keeping out for the locks?
I'm sorry?
Who were they keeping out with the locks? Was it the children or was it actually?
Anybody. Well, they were particularly concerned about people that worked for them.
Now, I'd like to also point out about this desk, in terms of furniture during this period, efficiency of space was very important. So this desk closes up and hides all the messiness of a desk, and is a beautiful piece of furniture. And it was important in that time because often the space was much smaller than we see today, but it's kind of like a New York apartment where you'll often see a desk that can be hidden, or where the materials.
And early on, things were all put against the wall because the rooms were not that big, and then there'd be a table, for example, to eat at, that would, a table would fold up, go vertically, the top would become vertical, and then that would be pushed against the wall, except when you were using it. That was
And
very
one of
common.
the reasons they did that is an interesting one, because at that period in American history, people liked to dance in their homes. So they would push all the furniture could be pushed back against the wall so that they could have room to dance. And that chair rail served the purpose so that when you push the chairs up against the wall,
So you see the
so they
back.
were having fun.
See the back of chairs, when you look at them, they're supposed to be round, like on that one round, you'll find that it's a little bit rubbed off on the back from having been against the surface of the wall for a while, repeatedly.
Why did they switch to slant desks? Were they like straight vertical before and then something folding out like that?
Yeah, or they were just, they're just a flat surface at the
No,
top.
but he's asking what did they ever go straight up?
Because I feel like you could get more storage in your...
No, more of it would have been stopping here and having a flat surface. So it would be an underpinning. This is not a desk. This is a small dresser, but it would be more like this. Flat top. Kevin, you want to say anything?
Well, these were used sometimes as desks.
They could be used.
Because you could sit, and they often have this cut out so that you can sort of sit there. But yeah, but the idea of merging the chest with the storage box with the desk, like putting all those three things together, was very new in the American colonies in around 1700 when that was made. And I think it was, houses were very small, and that was, they wouldn't have had a study where a room that was a library devoted to just writing or just doing kind of work at a desk. So I think John, saying that they would have stored linens or they would have stored something else in the two bottom drawers there is exactly sort of right. This is a little bit later and a kind of more high style with the walnut veneers, but this is a piece of furniture that you think, well, you have something that's specifically for dressing. So you have to have a space in your home that's specifically for dressing, which sort of indicates that this house probably had more space in it than
High status.
Yeah, high status.
Two other items. If you go straight up, how do you close it off? You need something on the top now. So you would either have to have a separate piece, or you would have to have another kind of hinge with then support to make sure it's sturdy when you come down. If you come up like this, you can actually close it up nicely. The other possible uses for the bottom, I'm just hypothesizing and conjecturing. There are members of my family that are not present in this room right now who believe it is bad to build a baby crib before the baby comes home from the hospital.
Yeah.
And so the baby crib is not supposed to be built until the baby comes home. Well, you need a place for the baby to sleep while the baby crib is being built. So I will leave the rest of the story as an exercise to the reader, but there are other purposes for big, nice drawers like that.
Yeah, so my question was that you would find these kind of space-conserving desks in homes, and it wouldn't be such of a problem in like places of business. You could have like the big, fancy, ornate desk, and it was all around.
Right.
That's right.
That's right.
This is interesting. And I guess so is it that's later?
That's like, this is what we call William and Mary. It was modeled after some of the English pieces, these trumpet legs and the very elaborate infrastructure there is very reminiscent of what you would see in England, not exactly, but 20 or 30 years before. So this is the early part of the 18th century. Could be 1720 or something like that.
Now, what I find most interesting about this section over here is not the piece of furniture, but the lights behind. So can anybody tell me what the purpose of this is? Yes?
Getting as much light from that candle as possible.
Getting as much light as possible from the candle. So what are the efficiency, what are the optimization issues you have with something like this?
Where you put the focus.
Where you put the focus.
As the candle burns, the focus changes.
As the candle burns,
Or it comes out of the...
Right. I mean, the focus for the object doesn't change, but the place where you would want the focus to be would change.
What sort of shape do you make it? Do you want a parabola?
What shape do you want? Do you want to make it a parabola? How easy is it to make a parabola?
Would it be a bit more efficient to sort of make it a different shape that reflected all the way down? You don't necessarily want light in your eyes. So did they want it to be more decorative by making it circular?
Right. Do you want the light going up to the ceiling? Do you want the light going down? Do you want the light focused to where you are?
Kind of that, where you put it in relation to the desk or the rest of the room.
Where you put it in relation to the rest of the room? What other parameters, when you have this in action, are going to be important? How fast the candle burns. So depending on how fast the candle burns, depending on the size of the candle, you might have a long period of time when it's close to optimal length. It's kind of expensive to get candles. You don't want to just chop off candles and throw them away. When would you actually light the candle based on when you want to work?
Would that also depend on the frequency of use? So if this is more of a decorative piece, then you could have it take the fire like only light for an hour a day, or it's used for the desk every day.
So I'm going to pass over to the
let me ask the question, why do they bother to make something so elaborate instead of just having a whole bunch more sconces, which would be a lot easier to do than to have this very elaborately done with all these pieces of mirrored glass. Yeah.
Candles expensive, but if you had that.
Exactly. Tallow, making candles were very, very expensive. So you wanted to maximize the light from every candle you have. And there are all kinds of sconces with different arrangements trying to maximize the efficiency of the amount of light you get in a room. And also remember that it wasn't easy to read. You needed to have quite a bit of light to be able to read. You could read by the fire, but if you wanted to read by candles, once again, you needed to maximize the amount of light. So this was a very ingenious solution to that, and one that was widely adopted.
Were a lot of the people who used this, were they working during daylight hours outside? Or was this now...
Oh, this is for, basically for after dark.
For after dark.
This is for after dark. No, you didn't really have much lighting in houses. I don't think, unless you were doing cooking.
Right.
Cooking certainly would have a fire.
And the idea of fixed sconces, so something that stays in one place also indicates that this is upper middle class or upper class household, because of course, you would want to be able to take light with you, but here meant that you had a lot of candles, a lot of lighting devices, so that you could actually just fix them in place.
And then there are these lighting devices that actually hold and you move around with you, which is with a single candle. Those generally you're not going to have this kind of back, but there are ones you carry it around with you, and there are places you see that on chairs they have these contraptions. You could put it on the back of a chair, holding onto the rail, holding onto the slat. So there are all kinds of ways of looking at this. Things that telescope out with a candle from a small base. So a lot of ingenuity, but a lot of focus on how to maximize light after dark. Of course, people weren't awake that much after dark. They went to sleep very early there too, and got up very early. They didn't have daylight savings time.
It's
I
very.
think that was from World War I.
Was it World War I? I think so.
I think it was to
World War
increase productivity.
Yeah.
But is there anybody here who has a phone that does not have a flashlight feature? Yeah. You can still use at least the display, which I had to do years ago when I was in India. And so there's one other item I would particularly like to show everybody. Can we show the log rule?
Sure.
And this will explain why I'm dressed this way.
We may be interested in buying your phone since we.
Oh, I was too far away from that one. But we'll see. Really American. Kevin did some research. I think he found online how it works. And so I was going to pose it to my students.
Oh, good.
All right, so Kevin will be back in a moment. Do you want to say a few words about this piece?
No, I think I already did. This is used by Scalar to determine how many log feet were in, and then it would be, they could figure out approximately where to cut and how much to cut.
But one of the things that fascinates us about this very utilitarian object that was used out in the woods, that somebody took the time and effort to make it an object of beauty. And throughout our collecting, we have really enjoyed seeing these utilitarian objects made into something of beauty. For example, a wash stick, which was used instead of an agitator like we had in our washing machines to move the washing around. We have a few of them that have been beautifully decorated, wood carved wood. So you would think, why would you bother with something that you use every day like that? But even though these people lived in these remote places, they cared about beauty. So it's pretty interesting.
Good.
So Kevin will be here in just a second. This is actually why I'm wearing this tie. I don't have a log rule, but I have a log ruler. So this is actually a slide rule tie clip, which, yes, it gives me geek points, yes. So when the electromagnetic pulse happens, I'm okay. So we're going to see how well this can be. So what are the first questions you should ask about something like this? How many sides? And the number of sides is a constant. No, there could easily be something where as you go down, one of the sides narrows. So it is not immediately clear that you would have the same number of sides on one part as the other, and you might want something to change here. So the question is, this is worth huge amounts of extra credit to anybody who can figure out how this works without using the internet. So whatever pictures you want to take and come, we are happy to do that. No internet searching allowed. How many of you have ever read the story A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter Miller? This is considered by many one of the greatest science fiction stories of all time. It's one of the first stories to deal with post-World War III, and most of history has been lost but the Blessed Saint Leibowitz, who is the founder of the order. And if you know anything about religious names, there is very little chance of having a Blessed Saint Leibowitz. They don't really have all the details right, but they find, unquestionably, writing of his. It says, "Can Kraut, 6 bagels, bring home for Emma." They're not sure exactly what this means, but it must be important because it is in the Blessed Saint Leibowitz's own handwriting. And so it's often very difficult to go back and figure out why were decisions made, what was the problem it was solving, why did they choose to do it one way rather than another. Now we are lucky, I think you were able to find online, so Kevin knows the answer, and he can give us hints if we get stuck. But so there's a bunch of questions you can ask. I will just give you some facts. This one is different than this one over here. This one, it seems like it has a metal on the ends, whereas this one does not. This one is more uniform. There are numbers on this, and there are lines. There are lines of different length, and there are a certain number of sides, and the number of sides is constant. What questions would you like to ask about the markings? Yes?
Oh, I just don't see the lines like that are different lengths. Oh, the way around.
So like over here, there's a big line right here going all the way around.
I just couldn't see it from there.
Yep. And then it doesn't look like all these lines are the same length. Now the question is whether or not that matters. It might not be important, it might just be the way they were making it. So do the lengths of these lines matter? What other questions?
We'll do the lengths of the line, of course. Do they always begin and end at ends of sides? Or are they sort of arbitrarily stopping in the middle because the sides can be even lengths?
Good question. So
How wide are the sides?
how wide are the sides? Is it the same length for each side all the way around? What else? Yes?
If I'm a logger, what am I getting paid for bringing back? Am I getting paid for bringing back exactly uniform thickness things, or am I...
So this is a really good question. The purpose of this is for the logger to use to get the best price for their products. There are occasionally towns, cities, counties, states that pass laws about the value of pi. And there are some places that pass values that pi shall be 3, some places pass pi shall be 4. If pi is declared to be 4, how should you buy land and how should you sell land? Well, one, you would want to buy one in circular or square and sell one in circular square. Which way? If pi equals 4, you want to sell in what kind of lots?
Square and sell in circular.
You want to sell in circular lots. And you want to buy in square lots.
Don't make anyone angry. I love that.
And so, the question is, this is a tool for the logger, so what issues are they trying to solve? There's a big question, though, that you haven't asked about the number and the markings. Essentially, all my research boils down to this. Almost every research problem I look at boils down to this, yes?
How many?
Related to how many, but it's a bit more than how many. It's the other question.
How long?
How are they spaced? How long? Where are they? How long do you have to wait for the next thing to happen? So this goes 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. I don't even have to look down at this point. The pattern seems to be pretty clear as to what's going on here. What is the pattern on all the others? Is a spacing of magnitude 4 here the same as the spacing of magnitude 4 here? Are they just a bunch of different scales? And so quick checks that I did with Kevin a while ago, it looked like it was pretty uniform going down the sides. And so each one of these sides is a different scale, but they do seem to be the same spacing down here as the same spacing up here. When you look at this piece, what else do you notice about it? Yes?
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Did they log with axes or with saws?
I'm sorry?
Did they log with axes or saws? Because if there's a flat end, you would potentially roll the log.
Saws. This would have been in sawmill times.
Is it something where they could just like go up to the end of the log and like see how many kind of units it is, and when they fill up like an entire length of the thing, they go around, they like kind of twist it, and then go to the next one and see how many times they do that?
That's sort of that's getting close, actually. Yeah.
And we do have a picture of them using that I will make available. This was,
It was like that
with Blessed Saint
trees that are
Leibowitz's
a lot bigger
writings.
than that, but like, yeah. Well,
So
like,
if kind of in cross section,
yeah.
about the circles and squares again. You know, the log's roughly a circle, and the lumber's going to be a square.
Right.
So if you kind of mark out a certain length and then rolled it and counted the number of kind of bumps it made, you could get like an area measure.
Okay, so like how you might measure like pyramids with a circular wheel. You walk along the base of a pyramid and you see how many cycles it goes around.
But it's lumpy, so you can count it.
But it's lumpy, so you can count. Maybe something along those lines.
Could it be for counting the number of rings on the tree? So that you can sort of, there are a lot of rings and it's hard to count them, so using those lines you can sort of quickly approximate them. So it's certain.
Or to just use this to count how many rings there are? How would we know which side to use? That's the difficulty, is we have a lot of sides.
Maybe you make them line.
So here's a hint, my kids like Star Wars. That should help you on the sides. There's something else that nobody has commented on about this.
Like the coloration.
Yeah, the dark side and the... right?
Is there anything
We were reading about Lego Star Wars this morning. So look at how much lighter it is over here. These numbers are completely gone.
One side was used more than the other.
So was one side used more than the other? So imagine if you just get this object, there is definitely an asymmetry in that the small numbers are here, the large numbers are here. These numbers are more worn. These numbers are better preserved. How do you think this was used? Yes?
Well, you were counting off the numbers, lower number from the left side. You have, and I forget the exact, the statistical thing that more lower numbers pop up more often.
Oh, Benford's law?
Yeah. I feel like you're more likely to use the lower
So, I mean,
side.
that's for, Benford's law is for this kind of log rule, not for this kind.
But how big were the trees they were using this for? Like what kind of trees?
These were used in, this kind of scale would have been used in Canada and in northeastern United States of Maine, so large, we're talking large trees. We have first growth forest trees and so substantial.
Deciduous trees.
Deciduous trees, yeah.
Is it maybe that they just like held it on that one side and that's why it's worn?
Well, so it could be they could be holding it here. If they were measuring things, there could be some way from, try not to touch, from being put up close like this, if they're measuring small things. But what do you think might be causing a lot of damage like this?
Okay, sorry.
No, you've got to go first this time.
If you have like an architect's scale, they have sort of distinct units, and then at the end they have smaller units.
Right.
So you can sort of measure how many units and then shift a little bit to get the accuracy at the end.
Ah, so there could be a gross scale and a small scale for refined measurements. What else, though, could cause this to be so much lighter than here?
That's where you're holding it.
This is either where you're holding it, or it could be more than just holding it. Yes?
Okay, this is definitely wrong, but...
Oh, then don't answer.
I can
Okay, so
kind
next.
of No,
There's got to be at least a chance. If there's no chance.
Right.
All right, there we
But
go.
it's, you know, it's me saying this. So what if they like, I cannot think they could have rolled it along the circumference of the tree and like the number of times you rolled across, you could like measure by how many turns, so that's where the different...
But if they roll it, will the damage occur equally?
What if they did it like against the end of the tree from the center of the thing?
Ah, so if they do something like that, if they roll it like that from the center, then the smaller length trees will have more damage.
Yeah.
Because this area will be exposed more. So I like the idea of rolling it.
If you were rolling it, it's like it's going to want to roll uniformly, and you're going to have to kind of pivot it. So you might have to hold it with one hand and then kind of roll with the outside.
Okay, now of course, I like this idea of rolling. The only problem with that is if we're doing something like that, why don't we just have a perfect cylinder? Why do we have all these different sides?
Because you could count. Well, I guess you could just count the rotations and stuff.
So you could count the rotations in the cylinder.
Are we assuming there's only one use for this, or is it used to do multiple things? In the
Good question.
If you had different widths of logs, maybe, I don't know, because the scales around the circular side, if you want to make a log, say like 2 inches thick, maybe you needed a certain number of the sides. If you want to make a log that was like 4 inches thick, you needed more on the sides.
You don't have to kind of roll in a circle, but it's a cylinder, and so like, it seems like when you roll it, you kind of mark off a rectangular area, like cross-section of the board.
Ah, so we wanted boards of certain thickness. So lots of possibilities.
I'm wondering about the difference between these two.
Yep.
Because if they're used for the same thing, that one's obviously way less cylindrical and way less worn down on one side. So were they used for like different types of trees?
Sorry. Let me put this down.
What was the difference in usage between the two?
So were these two used for the same purposes, or?
Yeah, they would have been used for the same purpose, but there are definitely differences. There are different.
So two more comments and we have to wrap up.
You said it was used at the sawmill, not on the tree.
No, it was that this is a time when logs are milled, but this was used at the site of where all the logs were gathered. The action, so that would have been used for measuring round logs cut straight from the trees, so not actually at the mill.
One more.
I just can't help but notice that obviously that one seems to have been used less, but it also has fewer sides, and the sides are larger than on that one. So maybe that's just because it was less practical and it was supposed to be more ornamental, but it seems like the side lengths don't matter as much as the fact that they're uniform all the way around.
Maybe. So the other thing for me is this almost implies maybe this is being stuck in something, stuck inside logs, stuck inside the ground, something like that that's causing damage. My daughter often dresses me. They found my old medals from when I was in academic decathlon, and so now in our UNO tournaments and Othello tournaments, whoever's winning gets the gold medal, silver medal, whatnot. And I almost wore that today, and one of the cases was not closed well from my high school days and has been exposed to air for 20 years. And I just found out exactly what expensive material or lack of expensive material they used in making this. And it's almost impossible to tell what metal that was now, 20 years later. So in terms of just being exposed to things, the damage that the elements can do over time. And to me, looking at this, I almost feel this end is being exposed to very different forces over time than this end. It could be from the size of the object you're measuring, it could be from going in the ground, it could be from rolling up against things, but there's lots of different issues. So at this point, I think it's time to end. I'd like to thank our hosts and thank our guests.
This has been a lot of fun for us. On your way out, one thing I would suggest you take a look at, there's actually two exhibitions, two groups of busks. Of course, everybody here knows where a busk is, so I don't have to explain it to you, but they were basically made by men for their women. They're corset stays. You can see how elegantly they are carved, and they're basically a form of scrimshaw. It was done on wood, it could have been done on whalebone, it could have been done on a bunch of different materials, and how creative they were for something that was very close, almost as close to the heart as the red light. Thank you very much.
I wanted to just say that also very quickly that when Jonathan and I were talking to Tina and Kevin about bringing this collection here to the museum, one of our hopes was that students in all kinds of disciplines would be able to use this material. And it's really delightful to see a math class here looking at this material and trying to figure out how things work and how things were built. It's very gratifying to us because we're so interested in education.
And when you figure out how to use that scaler, could you send me a little email?
Well, this is how we rated people back in the old days, right? Highest rated in class was That's totally about what it was when you were an undergrad.
That's about how long it took me to get through.
I'm the faculty president of the Phi Beta Kappa chapter, and one of the things that we can do is we can see the old records. And in the old days, getting into Phi Beta Kappa, if you had 3 or 4 A's and the rest B's, that was a great transcript at Williams. Times have changed a little.
I'm sure there's no great inflation here.